Flight attendant refuses to serve homeless man, stunned when he shows his platinum card. Welcome to today's compelling story, a tale of prejudice, revelation, and life-altering twists that underscore the power of compassion. Our narrative follows a flight attendant whose hasty judgment of a passenger's outward appearance leads to an unforgettable lesson. This so-called homeless man, disheveled and seemingly penniless, holds far more than meets the eye, something that will stun everyone aboard when he reveals his coveted American Express Platinum card. From a busy airport terminal to the confines of a turbulent cabin, this story brims with intrigue, immediate karma, and a final reckoning that no one saw coming. Buckle up, this flight is about to take off. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. The bustle at Miami International Airport was a lively tableau of travelers determinedly zigzagging their way through tight crowds. Massive digital boards flickered with arrivals and departures, while the aroma of coffee and reheated fast food hung in the air. Among the vibrant chaos, flight attendant Cassie paced near Gate 17, reviewing her roster for the afternoon flight to John F. Kennedy International Airport. She was meticulous and prided herself on efficiency. If the doors closed on time, that was a triumph. If a passenger threatened to slow them down, she knew exactly how to cut corners. Cassie loved her job in theory. The crisp uniform, the sense of authority she felt as she directed people to seats, and the perk of traveling across the country had thrilled her at first. Yet over the past 2 years, a cynical edge had crept into her demeanor. She caught herself snapping at passengers who asked too many questions, eyeing them with suspicion if they looked disorganized, and rolling her eyes whenever families with kids created a ruckus. Lately, her patience ran especially thin when she encountered anyone who didn't fit her narrow mold of a respectable traveler. She'd read the airline's manual about equal treatment, but in the high-pressure environment of overbooked flights, Cassie found that stereotypes and biases sometimes guided her decisions, whether she admitted it or not. The flight from Miami to New York was overbooked, placing Cassie in an edgy mood even before she stepped onto the Boeing 737. She scanned her final boarding list, pen tapping impatiently against the laminated paper, when her colleague Allison approached. "You good?" Allison asked gently, noticing the tension in Cassie's posture. "Just peachy," Cassie answered, with forced cheer, sighing as she realized she'd have to deal with an extremely full cabin, special meal requests, and countless demands for overhead bin space. Not for the first time, she lamented that she was stuck in economy class service for this flight, rather than the more spacious confines of first or business. "I just want to get this flight in the air and done," she added in a clipped tone. Allison pursed her lips, wanting to remind Cassie that the job was about more than just efficiency, but she decided to stay quiet. Cassie's impatience was well known among the crew. The last group of passengers began to file through. Cassie was positioned at the aircraft door, checking boarding passes with perfunctory politeness. A tall man in tattered clothing appeared at the entrance. He clutched a weathered backpack, the fabric frayed around the edges, and wore sandals more fitting for a homeless shelter than an airport terminal. His hair was unruly, and his face bore a week's worth of stubble. Despite his ragged appearance, his eyes sparkled with an alertness that belied his seemingly dire situation. He handed his boarding pass to Cassie. "Afternoon," he said in a soft voice, as if trying not to bother anyone. Cassie reflexively skimmed the name, which read David McCormick. She offered a polite but thin smile. "Yes, economy seat 28B, right down the aisle, sir." David nodded and stepped inside. After he was out of earshot, Cassie glanced at Allison, who had witnessed the exchange. "You see that?" Cassie whispered, making no effort to hide her incredulity. "He looks like he hasn't showered in days." Allison gave a slight shrug, or he could have had a rough patch. "It's not really our place to judge." "Sure, but I hope he doesn't cause any trouble," Cassie muttered, mentally bracing herself for a potential headache. As passengers settled in, Cassie and Allison began their usual checks. Cassie hovered around rows 25 to 32, scanning for seatbelt compliance and overhead bin chaos. She spotted David wrestling his backpack into the bin above row 28. A line of impatient travelers stood behind him, waiting to pass. Cassie approached with a tense smile. "Sir, can I help you there?" Her voice was honeyed, but just a shade too loud, designed more to move him along than to be truly helpful. David flushed slightly. "I think it's stuck on the latch," he admitted, trying to maneuver the strap. With a brusque shove, Cassie jammed the bag into the overhead bin. The force made David cringe, but the bag finally wedged in place. "There," she said, more triumphant than kind. "Please be mindful next time." He didn't protest, just whispered a soft thank you before sliding into seat 28B. Beside him sat an elderly woman with a gentle smile. She nodded in greeting, and David returned the gesture politely. As Cassie proceeded down the aisle, she noticed a teenage boy giving her a thumbs up from row 29. "Way to go, Cassie," he teased. "That bin's no match for you." She rolled her eyes and pressed on. She didn't mind a little banter from passengers, but something about David's presence continued to unsettle her. The flight was full, the temperature rising, and Cassie felt beads of sweat forming under her uniform collar. Shortly after takeoff, the seatbelt signs switched off. Cassie began preparing the first round of beverage service. The usual clatter of cans and plastic cups served as background noise. As she rolled the cart to row 28, she paused, her gaze falling on David's tattered clothes once more. The elderly woman beside him asked for a cup of black coffee, and David leaned forward, about to speak. Cassie cut him off with a pointed smile. "Sir, do you wish to purchase any refreshments today?" She emphasized the word purchase in a way that set a subtle challenge, as if assuming he didn't have the means. David blinked. "Actually, I'll have." Cassie raised an eyebrow. "Our beverages are complimentary in economy, but certain items like snacks or premium drinks will require payment." She eyed the battered sandals on his feet. David didn't miss the implication. "Thanks. Could I have a ginger ale, please? And the snack box, if that's available." Cassie felt a spike of annoyance. The man had asked for the snack box, which cost extra. She had already formed a judgment that he was penniless. "That'll be $7, she said. David nodded, reaching down to pat his pockets. He rummaged momentarily, then frowned. "I might need a moment to get my wallet from my backpack." "Sir, we can't go retrieving items from overhead bins unless it's an emergency, or you can easily reach it," Cassie said, folding her arms. "We have 150 other passengers on this flight. Maybe wait until we've served everyone. Then get your wallet." The subtle hostility in her voice drew a glance from the elderly woman, who looked at David with sympathy. "He can have my snack box," the older passenger offered. "I don't really need it." David smiled gratefully, but Cassie was quick to interject. "That's kind of you, Mum, but let's follow policy." Her tone left little room for disagreement. There was an awkward silence. Finally, David shrugged. "No worries, I'll wait for you to finish service, then I'll grab my wallet." "Suit yourself," Cassie replied, rolling the cart onward. As Cassie continued down the aisle, dispensing drinks and collecting payments for snack boxes, turbulence began to rattle the plane. A sudden jolt sent the beverage cart veering into Cassie. She stumbled, letting out a yelp as a can of cola burst open, spraying her uniform with sticky liquid. Passengers gasped, Some stifling laughs as Cassie stood, drenched, eyes wide with shock. "Are you okay?" Allison asked, rushing over with napkins. Cassie's face burned with humiliation and anger. "I'm fine," she snapped, though she was clearly rattled. The soda dripped down her once pristine uniform. She hurried to the galley, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. In her haste to be rid of the sticky mess, she nearly collided with another flight attendant who was retrieving water for a passenger. In that brief moment, Cassie felt the pangs of immediate karma, her annoyance with David, her callous assumption that he couldn't pay, and the smug certainty that she was somehow above him. The spilled cola felt like a cosmic slap on the wrist. Once she'd cleaned up as best she could, Cassie took a moment to breathe. Her eyes flitted to the overhead announcement speaker in the galley, half expecting the captain to chime in. Nothing came. She calmed herself, dabbing at her uniform with a damp cloth. "He's probably just a drifter," she told herself. "A strange guy who lucked into a plane ticket." Still, the day's events were wearing on her nerves. Determined to save face, Cassie decided she would not let David have the last word or the last laugh. She returned to the aisle with forced composure. By now, the seatbelt sign had blinked on again due to the turbulence. But she noticed David rummaging in the overhead bin, presumably seeking his wallet. She marched up to him. "Sir," she snapped, "you need to remain seated while the seatbelt sign is on. This is for your safety, as well as everyone else's." David retrieved something from his backpack, then quickly closed the bin and faced Cassie. "I'm really sorry," he said, eyes earnest. You just needed to violate flight safety protocol," she interrupted with an exasperated sigh. What if there was a sudden drop in altitude? He held up a black wallet. "I wanted to pay for the snack box. I was trying to be efficient." Cassie pursed her lips. "Well, next time, wait until it's safe." The elderly woman next to David piped up. "I asked him to get my book too. I thought it would be quick." "Please don't be too hard on him," Cassie forced a tight smile. "I appreciate that, ma'am, but rules are rules." David exhaled slowly. "Sure, I'm sorry." She softened only slightly. "Look, just sit down. We'll handle the transaction when it's safe to move about the cabin." He nodded and eased into his seat. Cassie glimpsed a corner of what looked like a platinum credit card in his wallet, but she dismissed the notion. Probably just some old, fake membership card, she thought. An hour into the flight, the turbulence abated, allowing the seatbelt sign to flick off. Cassie resumed her cart service, offering the snack boxes once again. Arriving at David's row, she braced herself for another awkward exchange. "Do you still want that snack box?" she asked stiffly, though there was an edge of impatience in her tone. David nodded. "Yes, please." Then, with calm deliberation, he pulled out the wallet she'd seen earlier. Opening it, he revealed an American Express Platinum card. Its unmistakable gleam caught Cassie off guard. Is that for real?" she blurted, unable to mask her shock. David looked puzzled by her reaction. "Of course," he said, handing it to her. "If you can process it here, go ahead and charge me for the snack box. And I'd also like the turkey sandwich if it's still available." Cassie's face burned red, her mind whirring with confusion. Why would a man who looked borderline homeless carry such a card? The cabin air seemed to press in as she fumbled with the portable card reader. A hush fell over the seats nearby, passengers sensing a shift in atmosphere. The older woman at David's side watched the scene unfold with mild amusement. Sure," Cassie mumbled, swiping the card. "The transaction approved with no issues. Here's your receipt," she said, placing it gingerly in his hand along with the sandwich and snack box. He thanked her politely, slipping the platinum card back into his wallet. As Cassie pushed the cart onward, her mind buzzed with uneasy questions. Was David some sort of eccentric millionaire, a wayward son of a wealthy family? She fought the urge to stare back at him. Something about the situation gnawed at her, fracturing her prior assumptions. Word spread fast among the flight attendants. Allison, who had been restocking supplies in the galley, cornered Cassie in a hushed tone. "Is it true he paid with an Amex Platinum?" Cassie nodded, unable to keep the bewilderment from her eyes. Allison shrugged. "People from all walks of life have credit cards. Maybe he's not homeless at all. Maybe he just dresses that way." Cassie felt defensive. Could be. Or maybe he found the card. Or it's stolen. Who knows? "That's a serious accusation," Allison replied, frowning. Cassie grew suddenly conscious of the pettiness of her words. "I'm just saying, it's weird. He looks like someone who wandered off the street." Allison lowered her voice. "It's not our place to judge a passenger's lifestyle or clothing choices. Just do your job, Cass." Cassie bristled but said nothing. She felt unnerved, somehow rattled by the possibility that her snap judgments had been completely wrong. But the day wasn't over yet, and Turbulence wasn't the only trouble in store. Halfway through the flight, an alarmed shout came from the forward cabin. A passenger near the front, a middle-aged man, clutched his chest and gasped for air. Panic rippled through the rows. The seatbelt sign flashed on as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, requesting any medical personnel on board to identify themselves immediately. Cassie rushed forward, as trained, to assist. She found the man hunched over, face pale and sweating. His wife wept beside him, urging him to stay calm. Cassie's adrenaline spiked. She hit the overhead call button for the flight crew and quickly asked if there was a doctor or nurse aboard. A tall woman from row 22 stepped up, a nurse, returning home from vacation. She and Cassie cleared space, carefully laying the man across a row of seats. The nurse asked for the onboard medical kit, which Cassie hurried to retrieve. The entire scene was a swirl of fear and urgency. In the midst of this chaos, Cassie heard a calm voice behind her. "I can help too. I'm a general practitioner." Turning, she saw David standing there, his face stern with concern. Cassie was speechless for a moment, both from relief and shock. The nurse nodded at him. "Great, please assist. We need to see if his airway is clear, check if it's a heart issue, or if he's having a panic attack." Together, David and the nurse assessed the man's vitals, quickly diagnosing signs of an angina episode. With calm expertise, David guided the nurse in administering the medication from the onboard kit. The distressed passenger's breathing started to stabilize, color gradually returning to his face. Allison, who had joined the scene by then, watched David work with deft professionalism. She shot Cassie an astonished glance, as if to say, "Did you know he was a doctor?" Cassie could only shake her head, jaw slack. Once the crisis calmed, David quietly passed instructions to the nurse regarding further care for the patient. He recommended the man be checked immediately upon landing. The passenger's wife thanked both medical professionals profusely, tears glistening in her eyes. The tension in the cabin dissipated, replaced by a collective sense of relief and gratitude. Cassie approached David, her voice shaking slightly. "You're a doctor." He nodded, tucking his stethoscope, an older model, back into his tattered backpack. "I was a resident at a hospital in Seattle. Life took a few unexpected turns, and, well, I ended up traveling a lot for volunteer work. Things got complicated." Cassie's eyes flicked to his well-worn clothes. "So you're not homeless?" David offered a wry smile. "I'm between permanent residences, I guess you could say. I spend much of my time in underserved areas, volunteering. My clothes get worn out quickly, and I often sleep wherever I can, sometimes in hostels, sometimes in tents if I'm working in remote clinics. But I do have money. Yes. That's how I afford to move around and help." Cassie felt her face grow hot, remembering all her earlier assumptions. The hush in the cabin had created an audience, and she was sure many ears were straining to hear the conversation. "Oh," she managed. That's incredible." He shrugged. "I don't see it that way. It's just what I believe in." Time seemed to slow as the plane continued its journey north. The tension that had crackled in the air turned into something else, an electric hum of astonishment mixed with admiration. Word spread that David had helped save a man from a critical situation. Passengers who had initially thrown him dismissive glances now looked upon him with respect. Some even thanked him personally as they passed on their way to the lavatory. Cassie found it increasingly difficult to meet David's eyes. She realized that her prejudgments and snide comments were not only unfair, but deeply humiliating in the face of his altruism. As she moved through the aisle, checking overhead bins and seatbelts for landing, she caught snippets of conversation. Who would have guessed? He saved that man's life. He's so humble. All the while, she felt pangs of guilt, remembering how she had publicly treated him as a second-class citizen, how she had refused him simple courtesies, and even tried to deny him a snack because she assumed he couldn't pay. It was an uncomfortable truth. Her training had explicitly forbidden such discrimination, yet she had let her biases take the wheel. After ensuring that everything in the cabin was secure for landing, Cassie decided to face the music. Steeling herself, she approached David, who sat quietly in 28B, reading a tattered paperback. The plane had begun its descent, and the roar of the engines filled the cabin. She crouched slightly so she could speak at eye level. "David," she began, voice subdued, "I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you. I made assumptions, and I was wrong. Really wrong." He placed a bookmark in the paperback and looked at her, expression kind but unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," he replied softly. Cassie's throat tightened. "I shouldn't have judged you by your appearance. It was unprofessional and inexcusable." She hesitated, searching for the right words to convey her regret. "I hope you'll accept my apology." David took a moment before answering. "Apology accepted. I'm not angry with you, Cassie. People judge, it happens all the time, but I appreciate you making the effort to own up to it." He offered a small smile. "Now, you know a bit more about me." Cassie nodded, relief stirring within her guilt. "Yes, I do. Thank you for being understanding." He merely nodded and returned to his book. Cassie walked away with a swirling mix of remorse and newfound respect. Just when Cassie thought the flight's drama was winding down, the captain announced a weather delay in New York. A storm had descended upon the East Coast, causing a backlog of planes circling above JFK. They would have to remain in a holding pattern for another 30 minutes, possibly more. Groans rose throughout the cabin. The seatbelt sign remained lit, and tension built again, though now from frustration rather than panic. Cassie did her best to reassure passengers, while Allison tried to soothe parents whose children were growing restless. David, for his part, stayed calm, occasionally offering a friendly word to the elderly woman beside him. Amid the churning clouds outside, the plane gave another jolt of turbulence, sending overhead bins rattling. Cassie held her breath, worried about the passenger who had just experienced chest pains. The nurse had given him a mild sedative, and he dozed quietly. Nonetheless, Cassie kept an anxious watch. Suddenly, an overhead bin directly above David's seat popped open. A loose duffel bag tumbled out, heading straight for the elderly woman. David reacted instinctively, bracing his arm to catch the bag mid-fall. He winced as the bag's weight connected with his forearm, but he managed to prevent it from hitting the passenger's head. Cassie hurried over, eyes wide. "Is everyone all right?" David smiled wryly, massaging his forearm. "Just a little bruise. She's okay thanks to luck and a quick reaction." "Thank goodness," Cassie breathed, turning to the older woman. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine, dear. This young man is a lifesaver in more ways than one," she replied warmly. Cassie secured the bin, ensuring no other items were at risk of falling. She offered David a cold compress from the medical kit, but he shook his head. "I'll be fine. Just keep an eye on that overhead bin." The moment was small compared to the earlier medical emergency, but it underscored the same truth. David was there to help, while Cassie had spent the entire flight assuming he was a nuisance. Finally, after nearly an hour of circling, the plane touched down at JFK. Exhaustion and relief rippled through the aircraft as passengers prepared to disembark. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and everyone stood reaching for their bags. Cassie watched David with new eyes as he gently assisted the elderly woman with her small suitcase. Then came a voice from the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to ask that passenger David McCormick, please remain seated until the rest of the cabin has cleared. Mr. McCormick, the flight crew would like a quick word before you disembark." A wave of curious murmurs swept through the cabin. The once skeptical travelers now seemed to anticipate another big reveal. Cassie wondered if the captain and first officer had heard about David's heroics. She felt a surge of gratitude that he would receive some kind of recognition. As passengers funneled toward the exit, several of them stopped to personally thank David. Some patted him on the shoulder. Others simply offered him kind words. He returned each gesture with humility. Cassie escorted the elderly woman to the front, ensuring she didn't have to fight the crowd. After everyone else was gone, David stepped forward, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Standing near the cockpit door was the captain, a graying man in his 50s named Captain Ramirez. Alongside the co-pilot, they both wore appreciative smiles. Captain Ramirez extended a hand. "Mr. McCormick, I just wanted to thank you personally. I heard from the flight attendants and passengers about the medical emergency you helped manage." "It was a team effort with the nurse," David replied modestly, shaking the captain's hand. "We appreciate your professionalism and kindness," the captain continued. "The airline will be sending you a formal commendation, and we'd like to offer you an upgrade voucher for your next flight." David blinked, clearly not used to such gestures. "That's very generous but not necessary." The captain smiled, resolute. "We insist. It's the least we can do." Allison stood beside Cassie, both of them witnesses to David's grace and the crew's gratitude. Cassie swallowed, hoping for a chance to voice her admiration publicly. She stepped forward. "David, on behalf of the cabin crew, I also want to say we're grateful for how you handled the situation. Your kindness toward the passengers and to us didn't go unnoticed." David nodded, his eyes drifting to Cassie, reflecting a gentleness that reminded her how profoundly she had misjudged him. Soon the group moved up the jet bridge and into the terminal, which bustled with frustrated travelers delayed by the storm. Cassie accompanied David partway to the baggage claim area, partly out of courtesy, partly out of lingering remorse. Allison had stayed behind to wrap up final duties aboard the plane. David adjusted the straps of his worn backpack, scanning the crowd for signs. His hair was still messy from the flight, and his sandals looked even more out of place amid the sleek footwear hustling around JFK. Yet Cassie saw him differently now. She noted the confidence in his stance, the kindness in his eyes, the unwavering calm that had transformed him from a presumed burden to an unexpected hero. She cleared her throat. "Do you, have a place to stay in New York?" The question was genuine concern, not condescension. He chuckled lightly, pulling a slip of paper from his pocket. "I'll be with a local organization for a week, offering medical assistance to homeless veterans. They're putting me up in a small apartment they rent for volunteers." Cassie's eyes flicked to the slip. It bore the name of a reputable charity group, another confirmation of David's altruistic life. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. They navigated down an escalator, reaching a corridor that branched off toward arrivals and baggage claim. Cassie found herself reluctant to end the conversation. "I'm sorry to pry, but how did you end up living like this? I mean, traveling around to volunteer instead of practicing in a traditional hospital." David paused, his expression thoughtful. Long story short, I lost someone very close to me to a preventable illness, someone who couldn't afford proper care. After that, I vowed to do what I could, wherever I could, to help people who fall through the cracks. A high-paying job in a fancy hospital doesn't fulfill me the way direct community service does. He shrugged. The pay is small, but it's enough, and I prefer to focus my resources on the people I help. Cassie's throat tightened. She felt deeply humbled, her own life and struggles seeming comparatively trivial. Well, I admire what you're doing. If there's anything I can do to help, he offered a gentle smile. You've done enough by treating me with courtesy, now far more than you did earlier, he added, teasing just enough to make them both chuckle. But honestly, I appreciate the thought. Just as they were about to part ways, a voice called out from the crowd, "Dr. McCormick! Dr. McCormick!" A young man in a blazer hurried toward them, brandishing a smartphone. "Hi, Matt Jenkins, from the New York Chronicle. I heard about your heroic deed on the flight. Mind if I ask a few questions?" Cassie stared in surprise. How had news traveled so fast? Perhaps someone on board had tweeted about David saving a man's life mid-flight. The modern age of viral stories was relentless. David seemed taken aback. "I'm not looking for publicity," he said, shaking his head gently. "I understand, sir," Matt insisted, "but word is you also do volunteer work in underserved communities. That's a story people need to hear." Cassie watched as David tried to politely refuse. "No offense, but I'd prefer to keep a low profile." Matt, however, was persistent. "Look, Dr. McCormick, I get that you're humble, but this could inspire others. Let's do a quick phone interview, please?" David hesitated, glancing at Cassie, who offered a supportive nod. She whispered, "It could help your volunteer groups get more attention and funds." Finally, David agreed. The reporter stepped aside with him, firing off rapid questions about his background, his volunteer work, and the mid-flight emergency. Cassie lingered a short distance away, catching snippets of the conversation. When the interview concluded, Matt handed David a business card. "Thank you so much, Dr. McCormick. You're a real-life hero." As Matt left, Cassie approached David with an almost amused smile. "Looks like your secret's out." David shrugged, slipping the reporter's card into his wallet. "I'm not sure I like all this attention, but if it helps someone down the line, maybe it's worth it." They finally reached the baggage claim area, and Cassie knew she had to get back to her duties soon. Passengers from their flight stood at the carousel, waiting for bags. Others from delayed flights milled around, complaining about the storm. Cassie turned to David. "So, I guess this is goodbye," she said, feeling a pang of sadness. "Thank you again for everything you did on the plane. I hope you find success with your volunteer work here in New York." David nodded, extending a hand. "It was nice meeting you, Cassie. Thank you for apologizing and for helping me help that passenger. I respect that." They shook hands, an unspoken sense of mutual respect passing between them. As Cassie walked away, she glanced over her shoulder to see David pulling his ragged backpack onto his shoulder. A newly arrived passenger brushed past him, barely giving him a second look, just another man in worn clothing. If only they knew the story behind those threadbare garments. A week passed, and Cassie was back in Miami, adjusting to her usual routine of short-haul flights. She couldn't shake the memory of David, nor the guilt she felt over how she had initially treated him. One afternoon, as she prepared for a flight briefing, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Cassie. This is David." The reporter from JFK ended up writing a profile. "He mentioned your airline and the flight crew's cooperation. It's generating a lot of positive buzz." Her heart skipped a beat. How had he gotten her number? Then she remembered she'd given him a business card from the airline in case he had further questions about filing an incident report for the passenger he'd helped. Moments later, her phone rang. It was her supervisor from corporate. "Cassie, the supervisor said, sounding surprisingly upbeat. "I just read the article in the New York Chronicle. Your name is mentioned too, along with David McCormick's heroic actions. The piece emphasizes how the airline staff worked together to save a life." Cassie felt a swirl of emotions, pride, relief, and a lingering twinge of shame. "That's wonderful," she managed, uncertain how to respond. "We'd like you to do a short promotional video for the airline about safety, compassion, and teamwork," the supervisor continued. "We think you'd be perfect, given your presence in the article." Cassie hesitated. Sure," she said, though a part of her wondered if the airline was glossing over her initial misjudgment. The supervisor confirmed the details, expressing how the story was a PR win. Cassie hung up, her thoughts drifting back to David. The airline saw only the positive side of the incident, but she knew the full truth. She had started off as the antagonist, so to speak, refusing to serve him properly because she believed he was just a homeless nuisance. That evening, Cassie typed out a text to David, thanking him for the update and letting him know the airline wanted to use the story as part of their image campaign. She confessed her mixed feelings, adding that she didn't want to be lauded without acknowledging her own mistakes. David's response arrived moments later. "I understand, but maybe this is your chance to spread a positive message about respecting everyone. You can share your perspective honestly." His words sparked an idea. Cassie realized she could use this platform not just to bask in praise, but to highlight the importance of treating all passengers with dignity. She typed back, "You're right, thank you," again. In the weeks that followed, Cassie recorded the promotional video alongside Allison. Although the airline's PR team suggested a more sanitized script, Cassie gently insisted on including the lesson she'd learned: never judge a passenger by appearance. Everyone has a story. The resulting material struck a chord with viewers, resonating more deeply than the typical corporate fluff. Months went by. Cassie's attitude during flights changed noticeably. She checked her own biases, going out of her way to assist anyone who looked like they might be struggling. It wasn't just an act, she genuinely felt remorse for her old approach. Passengers began offering positive feedback, praising her empathy and attention to detail. Meanwhile, David's volunteer work in New York made headlines again when he helped set up a mobile medical clinic for homeless veterans in the Bronx. Cassie followed his progress through social media updates, often posted by the charity organizations he worked with. Though they rarely spoke, an unspoken bond lingered between them, a testament to how one encounter on a flight could alter both their paths in unexpected ways. One day, Cassie found a letter in her personal mailbox at the airline's headquarters. Inside was a handwritten note on plain stationery. "Cassie, I'm writing to let you know that the man we helped during that flight has fully recovered. He and his wife contacted me after reading the article, and they're incredibly grateful to the entire crew, especially you and the nurse who assisted with the initial assessment. Also, the new clinic in the Bronx is up and running. We're seeing dozens of patients daily, many of them getting care they've needed for years. Keep up the good work in the skies. You're making a difference, more than you know." David McCormick. Cassie felt tears welling in her eyes. The note was simple but profound. It validated her transformation and reminded her how critical a single act of kindness could be. With a steadying breath, she tucked the letter into her bag. A flight was leaving for Los Angeles soon, and she had to be on it. As she walked through the terminal, uniform neat and head held high, she scanned the crowds differently than she had before, more open-minded, more willing to see each passenger as a complete person with hopes, hardships, and hidden strengths. If someone who looked out of place approached, Cassie no longer tensed up. Instead, she smiled, ready to greet them with the respect they deserved. She thought of David, of his battered sandals and platinum card, and of how superficial judgments could blind one to true humanity. Never again, she promised herself. Never again. Thank you for joining us on this thought-provoking journey where a single moment of prejudice could have overshadowed genuine heroism until an unexpected twist revealed the power of empathy and second chances. We witnessed how one man's humble appearance masked not only immense generosity but also world-changing intentions. And we saw how a flight attendant's hasty assumptions were challenged in the most surprising way imaginable, reminding us that beneath every exterior lies a story waiting to be heard. If you found this tale compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support encourages us to continue bringing stories of transformation, kindness, and awe-inspiring revelations to light. Safe travels.